top of me in a McDonald's commercial. McDonald's kills you, my nigga.
Put on camera
I'm not saying you
to
can't
traumatize. I'm not finished. La 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 means let me finish.
Don't take a fucking another photo, man. Don't take another fucking photo, man. I just got here, homie. Don't take no photos.
And the more and more I lean into God and work for God, the more wins God is going to bestow on our team, on Jesus' game. And for me to go out and just state an obvious and empathetic statement in the middle of the most liberal central, like to go, that was like Tiananmen Square or something. I was like, with Candace Owens, and we both wore the shirt at the same time. You know, we got some Jesus soldiers out here.
No more living for the culture, we nobody's slave. Stand up for my home. Even if I take this walk alone, I bow down to the king upon the throne. My life is his, I'm no longer my own.
Kanye West. I know, it's not exactly something that we need to still be talking about, as I think the topic of the horror show that is his current existence is something that we've pretty much beaten to death. And yet, I think Kanye is an important figure in the conversation around how we view theology from a cultural perspective. For all his faults and his incredibly idiotic words, Kanye is a poster child in my mind for what can happen when someone enters into the evangelical world with vulnerabilities and without safeguards. But before we can get to that topic, I think we need to go through a little bit of setup first.
Yeah. We at war. We at war with terrorism, racism, but most of all, we at war with ourselves. God, show me the way because the devil's trying to break me down.
We started this conversation really a few videos ago with a comparison between Kanye, Kendrick, and Lil Nas X and their respective views on Christianity. You should watch it. But since I know most of you won't, the conclusion of that video was that these three rappers are reacting to Christianity in ways that make sense to them because of their age and their upbringing and their personal values. Kanye in particular holds some fairly basic right-wing evangelical values that line up pretty well with his Gen X age overall. But this video missed some of the nuances in Kanye's faith life, and more interestingly to me, the unique circumstances that allow Kanye to go from a culturally unchurched person to a poster child of the church to cast aside by the church again in such rapid fashion. Kanye is one of the few, or maybe only people to go from a treasured guest used to prop up Joel Osteen to being too insane for even the likes of Alex fucking Jones. So how did that happen? Well, I guess we'll get into it. It's true, as I alluded to in my last video, that Kanye was raised up in the church, and although his parents sought to keep him in a maturing faith in Christianity, Kanye saw his faith as little else than a simple cultural interest. In a now-deleted Bossip interview in 2009, Kanye said, "I believe in Jesus as an icon, but I don't feel the responsibility to put my life on Jesus. I feel the need to take responsibility for my own successes and failures. That's why I say I don't give it all up to Jesus, because there are a lot of people who don't take responsibility for their lives and always think Jesus is going to handle it. And that's what I refuse to do." Kanye seemed to hold this attitude towards Christianity for the majority of his early career, wherein he saw Jesus as an icon, but he didn't really seem to feel a need to embrace him as anything that would be personally significant. So Kanye sought to sing and rap about the importance of faith on his track Jesus Walks, and how the media would never portray a song about God like they would project a song about sex and violence, but by Kanye's own admission, he didn't seem particularly interested in living that out for himself either. What it really boils down to, in my opinion, is this conflict between Christianity and what it presents to the issue of the ego. Ego and Kanye do seem to go hand in hand for the majority of his career, and Kanye, of course, feels a need to take ownership over his accomplishments and make success for himself rather than relying on any other systems, including religious ones, and Christianity does present a block to that. It's just a few short years later when Kanye makes a pivot with another religious statement. Kanye's messaging shifts pretty suddenly from seeing Jesus as a cultural icon to seeing Jesus as at least a faith leader to be revered and considered. He does continue his messaging around himself and his ego as being a central plot, even calling himself a god at one point.
Everybody says, who does he think he is? I just told you who I thought I was, a god.
Including on a 2013 song titled as such. But he begins to place Jesus in his music and the imagery surrounding his music as being equal in significance to his own influence. In fact, touring this album, Yeezus, in 2013, Kanye even brings out an actor playing Jesus on stage to have a physical conversation with, which is weird. But I guess God's finally getting some airtime at least. Kanye's acknowledgement of Jesus as a personal influence is the beginning of a teetering in Kanye's showing to his fans that he's becoming more and more invested in religious ideology. This is where Kanye exists for the next couple of years, as he gets married to notable wife Kim Kardashian, and as he starts to invest lyrically in the importance of faith and family in the 2016 album Life of Pablo. This album is half an expression of personal relationship with Christianity and half about relationships with family and friends that Kanye struggles with in his pursuit of fame and fortune. This album was also a moment where we start to see the greater culture of Christianity begin to look at Kanye as a potential ally or maybe even cultural force to be harnessed. Christians weren't thrilled with the tracks focused on sex or on Kanye's more explicit lyrics, but a performance of Ultralight Beam on SNL brought Christianity to the forefront just as the church was starting to publicly decry a coming extreme decrease in attendance and in growth in the US. From then on, Kanye West was a subject of Christian conversation that was unavoidable. And while the church was somewhat cynical about West's intentions, they knew that they could benefit from his celebrity status as well. And the doubts around his intentions or doubts around his effectiveness as a part of Christian culture only increase as we continue past the life of Pablo. By 2018, Kanye has been making waves musically for a decade, but he's also been, for the last couple of years, increasingly finding himself at the center of controversy and attention on what's happening outside of his music into his personal life.
I am the #1 most impactful artist of our generation. I am Shakespeare in the flesh. Walt Disney, Nike, Google. Now, who's going to be the Medici family and stand up and let me create more? Or do you want to marginalize me till I'm out of my moment?
Or why don't you empower yourself and don't need them and do it yourself?
How, Sway?
Take a few steps back to go.
You ain't got the answers, man. You ain't got the answers. You ain't got.
More specifically, he constantly is lashing out at people in interviews, and he very publicly endorses Donald Trump in a concert rant during a show in 2017.
I said something that was kind of politically correct. I told y'all I didn't vote, right? But I didn't tell you. I guess I told you. But if I would have voted, I would have voted on Trump.
While Kanye's never been a true stranger to controversy, these moments were starting to increase in variety and also insanity. Throughout this time period of Kanye's life, we see a struggle come to light. Kanye is mentally unwell. He is taking medications for these issues, and he either needs to be taking more of these, or maybe he's just refusing to take them as instructed in the first place. Kanye enters bouts of tensions with his family and wife, who he was so publicly and positively talking about before, and ultimately, he ends up spending stints in mental psychiatric facilities, likely at the behest of his then-wife, who we now know was probably issuing ultimatums about their relationship. It was getting to be a bit of a mess, and the church wasn't really helping by also putting pressure on Kanye to sort of figure out what to do with his instability. However, the distance between Kanye and Christianity was going to diminish because the peak of Kanye West's impact on church culture was just starting. The album that he's coming out with now, Jesus is King in 2019, is hitting the shelves, and Kanye West wins a Grammy for Christian Album of the Year. He's appearing on stage with Christian music celebrities and going to mega churches as a Christian celebrity himself, but most of all, he's showing young people in the church that there is a place for evangelical conservatism within the cultural mainstream. And this is great news for the evangelical world. Here you had a Trump-loving conservative black man making Christian music that was relevant. What more could you ask for to reach the youngest voters as well as the youngest kids sitting in your pews, if not for Kanye? This trend of Kanye's success with Christian audiences continue, but so does continue the trend of controversies, which always happen to appear around album release dates, by the way. But a couple of months after the release of his next album, Donda, Kanye begins his biggest spiral to date. He is removed from Twitter as he starts spreading anti-Semitic sentiments online, and he also begins popping up with alt-right extremists and neo-Nazis.
Right, you're not Hitler, you're not a Nazi, you don't deserve to be called that and demonized.
Well, I see good things about Hitler also. The Jew, I love everyone. I'm done with the classifications. Every human being has something of value that they brought to the table. especially Hitler.
He out-insanes Alex Jones on his own batshit internet show. He dares Adidas to drop his shoe deal, and they do, to the loss of millions of dollars from both parties. Kanye's expressions of hate is a blatant extreme change, which causes the general church at large to put some distance between themselves and Kanye. This is interesting, by the way, because the evangelical community has had its own open struggles with anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic remarks in the past couple of years, but I digress. It's around this time that Kanye is feeling debased by Christianity and looking for someone to embrace him. And he finds that embrace in a more extreme community than even the neo-Nazis and Nazi light entertainers he'd been associating with thus far. This acceptance comes from a far-right religious expression of Messianic Jewish cult-like followers known as the Black Hebrew Israelites. If you're not familiar, the Black Israelites are an extreme faction branch off of Christianity that seeks to recharacterize the black population in America as the true Israelites, as described in the Old Testament.
Black people can't be anti-Semitic. We are Jew. You understand what I'm saying? We are Jew. So cool out until you do your facts. Until you really do the facts with the fake indoctrination that y'all put into the school.
While there are less extreme versions of this religious expression, and it is wrong of me to misrepresent all of this movement as cult-like, there are also a lot of absolutely batshit insane people in there as well. Some of them calling all current Jewish people as essentially imposters, and also calling all white people as an evil, which will be condemned by Christ upon his return.
I don't have no rapper friends, I hang with the vultures. Big ass toaster, hit your whip and flip it over. Big old nigga, he's a big old goofy, Rudy Gobert. Jump off in that lane, you gon' get put on a poster. LaFerrari F8, Lamborghini Roadster. I turned 10 bricks into 12, them birds had a growth spurt. We gon' do some shopping later, I'ma need some dough first. I just got some head in a ghost, and I ghost her.
And this is kind of where we leave Kanye West's religious ideas today. Some of the expressions on his most recent Vultures 1 album are fed to him by that Black Israelite movement that we talked about, while others are simply coming from a place of anti-Semitism in general, or even maybe just Christian right-wing ideas in general. And there's still this other mix of Christian nationalism combined with Kanye's ego above everything else. And all of this combined leads to a very confused place for Kanye. And so what's next for him and his theological expression? Well, I guess we'll find out soon, because supposedly there are 2 albums coming out in follow-up to Vultures 1. But who knows if those are going to actually come out when they're supposed to? And realistically, who knows by the time that we get them, if Kanye's even going to be making any sense at all at that point. The story of Kanye's theology is really a story about Kanye's mental health struggles. He has been consistently yes-manned into falling for countless problematic behaviors and opinions that are really extreme and idiotic. I don't necessarily feel bad for Kanye, at least not in the same way that a lot of his fan base expresses. And I know that there are a lot of people who are listening to Kanye's music militantly and are just worshiping him nonstop, and those people are lunatics. But what I really think I struggle with the most in Kanye's case is that he isn't the first person that I've seen this sort of thing happen to. Kanye has always been so focused on ego and has often been seen as an attention-seeking reactionary. So, after the release of Life of Pablo, Kanye's experience with the church is one that feeds into that drive. It's hard to really blame Kanye for his Trump focus and his political opinions, for instance, given the fact that the church essentially told this mentally sick man that if you embrace X, Y, and Z, then we will support you more. So he did X, Y, and Z. And then you take this same man with the same mental issues and you leave him to stew while he's making his next album, publicly divorced and mocked for his political views, and of course he feels that he has to double down. He embraces even harder to the alt-right pipeline, and the next thing you know, he's on Alex Jones saying,
There's a lot of things that I love about Hitler.
And even though this step ultimately means that Kanye is rejected by the church at large, minus a few extreme actors, he has an even more extreme group of actors ready to pick him up every time he falls. After all, how many of our boomer parents and grandparents have we seen fall down somewhat similar declines in their understandings of the world? There is a right-wing pipeline that's real and potent, and it aligns pretty heavily with the right-wing evangelical church, and it does so pretty easily. Kanye's story since about 2012 has been following that pipeline almost to a T. Kanye is a victim of the evangelical conservative movement in America, and he also struggles with his mental health. And even though the church is now placing a good amount of distance between themselves and Kanye, I would blame the Christian culture for Kanye's downfall more in some ways than even Kanye himself. Kanye embraced the church, and the church embraced Kanye. The church said that being a devout Christian was important, that being a strong man was important, that getting married was important, that taking political stands, the right ones,
Do you have people aborting half your race?
Were important, and Kanye wandered that path successfully, and the church rewarded him for it. But it didn't take long after that experience with the church for us to begin to see the extremist paths take hold as well. The alt-right pipeline told Kanye that if he wants to be a devout Christian, that he needs to buy into conservative family values. It told him that he needed to be in a male-dominated household. It told him that the world was run by globalists, and eventually convinced him that Jews were harming his life and career, and that black people should be devalued.
The red are the executives that are Jewish at these companies.
And we saw Kanye buy into all of it, just as he did with the church stuff just a few years before. And the scary thing is that if you or I had mental challenges the way that Kanye does, I'm not entirely convinced that we wouldn't be making the same types of mistakes that we see Kanye making if we were in those same circumstances. The theological examination of Kanye shows the potential dangers that can come from a full embrace into any one evangelical ideology. There isn't really a lot of work needed to take someone like Kanye, who has some instabilities from evangelical, conservative family values to alt-right, anti-Semitic extremist. For someone less famous than Kanye, or maybe just less financially soluble, this path still exists, but the journey often ends with violence and extremism rather than just public shame. Ultimately, what Kanye needed was a less narrow worldview, with more inputs from outside the evangelical alt-right bubble, as well as a strong support group of friends that were willing to be less focused on being yes men and more focused on what was good for Kanye. But maybe when the problem is also the one writing your paychecks, it's easier said than done. The story of Kanye's religious expression is entirely confusing and ultimately sad. However, the reaction of the Christian world to Kanye's ups and downs is extremely interesting to watch. But I'm curious about what you guys think. Is Kanye lost forever, or can someone bring him back down to earth? Thanks for watching, guys. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you want more conversations around theology and pop culture. But most importantly, remember that I love you all.